Sarah Martinez clutched her mop bucket as the bailiff sneered, "You're just here to clean the floor, nothing else." She nodded quietly, but when the judge asked a question no lawyer could answer, Sarah spoke up from the corner. What happened next changed everything. Before we continue, if you enjoy incredible real-life stories of triumph against all odds, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning when Sarah Martinez pushed through the heavy glass doors of the downtown courthouse. The building towered above her like a monument to everything she felt she could never reach. At 28, Sarah had been cleaning office buildings for 3 years, ever since her husband Miguel left on Emma's 4th birthday, claiming he couldn't handle the responsibility anymore. That night, Sarah had sat on her daughter's small bed watching Emma sleep and made a silent vow that they would not just survive, they would thrive. The janitorial company, Pristine Services, had assigned her to this new location just yesterday. After her previous supervisor noticed her meticulous attention to detail, Sarah carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to be invisible, but beneath that carefully constructed exterior burned an intellect that had never found its proper outlet. She had graduated valedictorian from Roosevelt. High school with a 4.0 GPA, earned a partial scholarship to State University where she majored in pre-law, maintaining a 3.8 average while working 2 part-time jobs. Then life happened. Pregnancy at 19, marriage at 20, and the slow dissolution of dreams as daily survival took precedence over long-term ambitions. Her supervisor, Mrs. Henderson, a stern woman in her 60s who had worked in courthouse maintenance for 27 years, had been crystal clear during the brief orientation. Listen carefully, Sarah. This isn't like cleaning office buildings or shopping centers. Courtrooms are sacred spaces where lives are changed, fortunes are won and lost, and justice is dispensed. You clean before court sessions, during breaks, and after hours. You do not speak to anyone unless spoken to. You do not interfere with proceedings. You are invisible. Understood? Mrs. Henderson's eyes had been cold, but not unkind, as she continued. I've seen good workers get fired for forgetting their place. Don't be one of them. Sarah had nodded, adjusting her worn uniform that still smelled faintly of industrial detergent. The polyester fabric was scratchy against her skin, and the shoes provided by the company were a half size too small. But complaints were luxuries she couldn't afford. She understood perfectly. Invisible was something she had become an expert at being. In grocery stores, she was ignored by cashiers who looked through her as they processed her WIC vouchers. At Emma's school, other parents made polite conversation, but never invited her to join their social circles. Even at family gatherings, her success-driven relatives would ask about Emma's school performance, but rarely inquired about Sarah's own aspirations or well-being. The courthouse hallways echoed with her footsteps as she made her way to courtroom 4B, passing portraits of distinguished judges from decades past. Each portrait seemed to stare down at her, reminders of a world she had once dreamed of joining. Judge Patricia Hawthorne's courtroom was known throughout the legal community as one of the most challenging assignments. Judge Hawthorne had a reputation for brilliance, fairness, and an absolute intolerance for incompetence. Lawyers who appeared before her came prepared or faced her legendary sharp tongue. The courtroom itself was an impressive space with rich mahogany paneling, brass fixtures that gleamed under carefully positioned lighting, and an American flag that hung with military precision. Sarah began her routine, methodically mopping the imported Italian marble floors, wiping down the hand-carved wooden benches that could seat 100 spectators, and ensuring every surface gleamed. She had developed her own system over the years. Start with the highest surfaces to avoid recontaminating lower areas, use specific cleaning solutions for different materials, and always work from the back of the room toward the front to minimize disruption if early arrivals appeared. The work was meditative for her. In these quiet morning hours before the chaos of legal proceedings began, she found a strange peace in the repetitive motions. Each stroke of the mop was a prayer for stability. Each wiped surface a hope for a better future for Emma. As she worked, Sarah's mind wandered to her daughter, probably just waking up at her neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. Elena Rodriguez was a godsend, a retired teacher who watched Emma every morning for $25 a week, far less than any daycare would charge. Emma was brilliant, already reading at a 5th grade level despite being in 2nd grade. Her teacher, Miss Peterson, had mentioned that Emma showed exceptional analytical thinking and an unusual ability to spot patterns others missed. She asked questions about everything, from why the sky was blue to how laws were made, often stumping Sarah with inquiries that required evening research sessions at the public library's computer terminal. Sarah had promised herself that Emma would have every opportunity she never had. That promise was what got her out of bed every morning at 5 a.m., what sustained her through double shifts when money was tight, and what made her swallow her pride when accepting government assistance. The first attorneys began arriving around 8:30 a.m. Sarah retreated to her supply closet, a narrow space barely large enough for her cart and cleaning supplies, emerging only when needed. She watched from the periphery as the courtroom filled with the day's participants. Today's case was a complex corporate fraud trial that had been making headlines for weeks. The local newspaper had dubbed it the Meridian Millions, due to the staggering amount of money allegedly stolen from city coffers. Millions of dollars were at stake, and the legal teams on both sides were comprised of the city's most expensive attorneys, men and women who drove luxury cars and wore suits that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Sarah had always been fascinated by the law. In high school, before life took its unexpected turns, she had been captain of the debate team, president of the mock trial club, and editor of the school newspaper. Her favorite teacher, Mr. Williams, had encouraged her to pursue law, even writing, a glowing recommendation letter for her college applications. She had dreamed of becoming a prosecutor, fighting for justice for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She had even been accepted to the local community college with plans to eventually transfer to law school, but pregnancy, marriage, and then abandonment had redirected her path entirely. The college acceptance letter still sat in a box in her closet, yellow with age but somehow still representing a road not taken. Now, as she quietly cleaned around the edges of these legal proceedings, she felt like she was watching a world she could never enter, yet strangely, she understood the nuances of the arguments better than she cared to admit. Judge Hawthorne called the court to session at exactly 9 a.m. She was an imposing woman in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back severely and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see everything. Sarah had heard the other cleaning staff talk about her with a mixture of respect and fear. Judge Hawthorne had served on the bench for 15 years after spending 20 years as a prosecutor, and she was known for running her courtroom with military precision. She had grown up the daughter of a factory worker and a seamstress, putting herself through law school by working nights as a security guard. Her rise through the legal ranks had been meteoric but hard-earned, and she had zero tolerance for lawyers who tried to coast on privilege rather than preparation. The case involved Meridian Industries, a construction company accused of defrauding the city on multiple public works projects over a 5-year period. The prosecution alleged that Meridian had systematically overcharged for materials, used substandard supplies that wouldn't meet safety standards, and falsified inspection reports to cover their tracks. The scheme was estimated to have cost taxpayers over $8 million, money that should have gone to schools, hospitals, and infrastructure improvements. The defense maintained their client's innocence, claiming the charges were politically motivated, retaliation for Meridian's criticism of the mayor's urban development policies. As Sarah worked quietly in the back of the courtroom, she found herself drawn into the testimony despite her best efforts to remain focused on her duties. The prosecution's star witness was David Chen, Meridian's former project manager, who claimed to have evidence of the fraudulent practices. Chen was a thin, nervous man in his 40s who kept adjusting his tie and glancing anxiously at the defense table. He had worked for Meridian for 12 years before his conscience finally compelled him to come forward. His testimony was crucial because he had direct access to the company's internal documents and had personally witnessed many of the alleged fraudulent activities. However, Chen was clearly terrified of the repercussions of his testimony, frequently stumbling over his words and contradicting himself under the pressure of cross-examination. During the lunch recess, Sarah was cleaning the witness area when she overheard 2 of the defense attorneys talking in hushed tones near the water fountain. Marcus Webb, the lead defense attorney, was a silver-haired man who had built his reputation defending white-collar criminals for the past 25 years. His partner, Jennifer Hayes, was younger but equally ruthless, known for her ability to discredit witnesses through microscopic examination of their testimony. Chen's testimony is falling apart, Webb said, loosening his expensive silk tie. If we can just discredit his timeline completely, we can create enough reasonable doubt to walk away from this. Hayes nodded, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her briefcase. The prosecution's entire case hinges on that purchase order from March 15th. If we can prove it was processed differently than Chen claims, demonstrate that he's confused, or lying about the dates, we're golden. The jury will doubt everything he said. Sarah didn't mean to eavesdrop, but their conversation triggered a vivid memory that made her stomach clench with recognition. 8 months ago, while cleaning the executive offices at Meridian Industries during her previous assignment, she had accidentally knocked over some papers from the desk of Robert Patterson, one of the company's senior managers. Patterson had stepped out for a phone call, leaving sensitive documents scattered across his workspace. While gathering the papers up, Sarah had noticed something unusual about the company's filing system that had struck her as odd even then. They kept duplicate records of all purchase orders, but the duplicates were dated differently than the originals, sometimes by days, sometimes by weeks. The original documents were kept in standard filing cabinets, but the duplicates were locked away in a separate cabinet system that Patterson had quickly secured when he returned. At the time, she had thought it was strange, but hadn't given it much consideration, assuming it was some kind of internal accounting procedure she didn't understand. Now, listening to the defense attorney's strategy, she realized she might have witnessed the very system being used to defraud the city. The afternoon session resumed with Chen back on the stand for cross-examination. The defense attorney, Marcus Webb, was ruthless in his questioning, employing every tactic he had learned in his decades of practice. He methodically picked apart Chen's testimony, focusing especially on the March 15th purchase order that supposedly proved the fraud. Webb's strategy was clear. If he could prove Chen was lying or mistaken about even one detail, the jury would question everything the witness had said. "Mr. Chen," Webb said, his voice dripping with carefully calculated skepticism as he approached the witness stand, "you testified earlier that this purchase order was processed on March 15th, but the documentation shows it wasn't approved until March 22nd. Can you explain this 7-day discrepancy?" Webb held up a document with dramatic flourish, ensuring the jury could see the highlighted date. Chen looked confused and increasingly distressed, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the courtroom's air conditioning. I'm certain it was the 15th. I remember specifically because it was the day before my daughter's 16th birthday party, and I had to stay late to process it. My wife was angry because I missed helping with the decorations." Webb smiled coldly, sensing weakness like a predator detecting wounded prey. "Well, Your Honor, the defense moves to introduce Exhibit D-47, which clearly shows the approval date as March 22nd, making Mr. Chen's entire timeline not just incorrect, but impossible. Either Mr. Chen's memory is severely compromised, or he's deliberately misleading this court." The prosecutor, District Attorney Maria Santos, a dedicated public servant who had built her career prosecuting corruption cases, objected vigorously, but Judge Hawthorne allowed the exhibit after careful consideration. Sarah watched as the prosecution's case began to crumble before her eyes. She could see the doubt creeping into the jurors' faces, the way they shifted uncomfortably in their seats and began to look at Chen with suspicion rather than sympathy. She knew something that could change everything, something that could prove Chen was telling the truth and expose the real fraud, but who would listen to a janitor? Who would believe that someone whose job was to empty trash cans and mop floors could possess information that Harvard-educated attorneys couldn't access? During a brief recess, while Sarah was emptying wastebaskets near the judge's bench, she overheard Judge Hawthorne speaking quietly to her clerk, Margaret Stevens, a woman who had worked in the courthouse for nearly 30 years. Judge Hawthorne's voice was barely audible, but Sarah's position allowed her to catch the conversation. "Margaret, this case is more complex than it appeared initially. The timeline discrepancies are troubling, but something doesn't feel right about the defense's evidence either. I've been doing this for 15 years, and my instincts are telling me there's something we're not seeing." Margaret nodded solemnly. "I've seen a lot of cases come through here, Your Honor, and the smart criminals always have backup plans. Sometimes the most obvious explanation isn't the right one." Sarah's heart raced. She knew she should stay silent, stay invisible as she had been trained, but the memory of those duplicate files burned in her mind. She had seen firsthand how Meridian operated, and she knew the prosecution was right about the fraud, even if they couldn't prove it with their current evidence. The afternoon stretched on with more testimony and legal maneuvering. Sarah continued her duties, but her mind was racing. She thought about Emma, about the promise she had made to give her daughter a better life. She thought about all the times she had been told to stay quiet, to be invisible, to accept her place in the world. As the day's session was winding down, the prosecution called their final witness, an accountant who had reviewed Meridian's financial records. The accountant's testimony was technical and dry, but it was clear that without stronger evidence, the prosecution's case was in serious jeopardy. During the accountant's testimony, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The defense attorney was showing dates and documents that she was certain were incorrect, based on what she had seen while cleaning Meridian's offices. The discrepancies weren't random mistakes. They were systematic alterations designed to hide the fraud. Webb was in the middle of what appeared to be a devastating cross-examination when Judge Hawthorne suddenly held up her hand. "Mr. Webb, I need clarification on something. You've shown us several documents with specific dates, but I'm having trouble reconciling the timeline with other evidence presented." Webb looked confident. "Your Honor, the dates are clearly marked on each document. The defense maintains that the prosecution's timeline is fundamentally flawed." It was then that Judge Hawthorne asked the question that would change everything. "Can anyone in this courtroom explain how a purchase order could be physically filed and approved on March 15th when the vendor registration wasn't completed until March 18th? The courtroom fell silent. The prosecutor looked through his files frantically. Webb seemed momentarily stunned by the question. The accountant on the stand shook his head, admitting he couldn't explain the discrepancy. Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the answer. She had seen it with her own eyes while cleaning, but she was just the janitor, invisible, irrelevant. Yet, as she looked around the courtroom at all these highly educated, expensive attorneys who couldn't answer a simple question about filing systems, something inside her shifted. Slowly, Sarah stepped forward from the back corner where she had been working. Every eye in the courtroom turned to her. The bailiff immediately moved to intercept her, his expression stern. "Ma'am, you need to return to your duties," the bailiff said firmly. But Judge Hawthorne raised her hand, her sharp eyes fixed on Sarah. "Wait, you look like you have something to say." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper when she first spoke. "Your Honor, I think I might know the answer to your question." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Webb shot to his feet. "Objection! This woman has no standing in this court. She's not qualified to testify about anything related to this case." Judge Hawthorne studied Sarah for a long moment, then gestured for silence. "State your name and your connection to this case." "Sarah Martinez, Your Honor. I clean the courthouse, but I also used to clean the offices at Meridian Industries." The prosecutor's head snapped up, suddenly interested. Judge Hawthorne leaned forward. "Continue." Sarah's hands trembled as she spoke, but her voice grew stronger with each word. "While I was cleaning at Meridian, I accidentally knocked over some papers. When I was picking them up, I noticed they had 2 sets of filing systems. They kept the original purchase orders in one file, but they also kept duplicates with different dates in another file. The duplicate files had dates that were sometimes weeks different from the originals." The courtroom was dead silent. Webb's face had gone pale. Judge Hawthorne's voice was measured and careful. "Ms. Martinez, are you saying you observed a dual record-keeping system at Meridian Industries?" "Yes, Your Honor. They had cabinets with locks in the back office. The duplicate files were kept there. I only saw them because I accidentally spilled coffee on the desk and was cleaning it up when Mr. Patterson, he was a manager, left the cabinet open." Webb was on his feet again. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This woman has no credentials, no expertise in document analysis. Her testimony is irrelevant and prejudicial." But the prosecutor was already moving. "Your Honor, if Ms. Martinez observed systematic dual record-keeping, this could explain the timeline discrepancies that have plagued this case." Judge Hawthorne looked directly at Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, do you understand the seriousness of what you're saying? You're testifying under oath that you witnessed evidence of potentially fraudulent record-keeping?" Sarah thought of Emma, of the promise she had made of all the times she had been told to be invisible. "Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely." What happened next would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. Judge Hawthorne ordered an immediate investigation into Sarah's claims. Within hours, search warrants were issued for Meridian's offices. The locked filing cabinets Sarah had described were found exactly where she said they would be, containing thousands of duplicate documents with altered dates. The investigation revealed that Meridian had been running an elaborate fraud scheme for over 5 years, systematically bilking the city out of millions of dollars. The duplicate filing system had allowed them to alter timelines, inflate costs, and hide substandard work. Without Sarah's testimony, the scheme would have continued indefinitely. But the real surprise came 3 days later. Sarah was at home, helping Emma with her homework, when there was a knock at the door. Judge Hawthorne stood on her doorstep, dressed in casual clothes, holding a manila envelope. "Ms. Martinez, do you have a moment to talk?" They sat at Sarah's small kitchen table, while Emma played in the living room. Judge Hawthorne opened the envelope and pulled out several documents. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah? What you did in my courtroom took tremendous courage. You risked your job, your reputation, everything to tell the truth." Sarah shook her head. "I just couldn't stay silent anymore, Your Honor. I've been invisible my whole life, but watching those lawyers who make more in a day than I make in a year struggle with something I knew the answer to. I realized that sometimes being invisible means people who need help don't get it." Judge Hawthorne smiled. "That's exactly why I'm here. I've been thinking about what happened, and I have a proposition for you." She slid a document across the table. "This is an application for a paralegal position in my office. The job comes with full benefits, flexible hours, so you can care for Emma, and most importantly, tuition assistance for night law school." Sarah stared at the document, unable to believe what she was reading. "Your Honor, I don't understand. I'm just a janitor." "No, Sarah. You're someone who sees details others miss, who understands systems, who has the courage to speak truth to power, and who clearly has a natural understanding of legal processes. Those are exactly the qualities I need in my office." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Mama, why are you crying?" Sarah wiped her tears and looked at her daughter, then back at Judge Hawthorne. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say." "Say yes, and then we'll get you enrolled in law school. This city needs more attorneys like you. People who understand that justice isn't just about legal precedent and procedure, but about making sure the truth is heard, no matter who's speaking it." 6 months later, Sarah Martinez began her first day as a paralegal in Judge Hawthorne's office. She still got up at 5 a.m., but now it was to study before Emma woke up. 3 years later, she passed the bar exam on her first try. 5 years after that day in the courtroom, attorney Sarah Martinez opened her own practice, specializing in representing workers who had witnessed corporate fraud. Emma, now 13, and still asking questions about everything, often visited her mother's law office after school. She would sit at the conference table doing homework while her mother prepared cases, and sometimes she would ask about that day in the courtroom that changed everything. "Mama, were you scared when you spoke up in court?" Sarah would always pause her work and give her daughter her full attention. "Terrified, Mija. But you know what I learned that day? Being invisible isn't protection. It's just another kind of prison. The moment I decided to be seen, to use my voice, everything changed." The Meridian Industries case became a landmark. Prosecution, leading to new regulations on public works projects and dual record-keeping systems. Marcus Webb was disbarred for presenting fraudulent evidence. David Chen, the nervous witness whose testimony had seemed to be falling apart, was revealed to have been coerced by Meridian's management to lie. Sarah's testimony had actually saved his reputation. Judge Hawthorne continued to mentor Sarah throughout law school and beyond. She often said that Sarah's interruption of that trial was the most important moment in her 30-year judicial career, not because it solved a case, but because it reminded her that justice can come from the most unexpected places. Years later, when Sarah was arguing cases before the Supreme Court of her state, reporters would ask about her unusual path to legal prominence. She would always tell them about that Tuesday morning when she was told to just clean the floor, and how sometimes the most important testimony comes from the person everyone expects to remain silent. Emma Martinez is now in law school herself, following in her mother's footsteps. She often tells people that her earliest memory is of her mother mopping floors before dawn, but her most important lesson came from learning that no honest work is beneath dignity, and no person is too small to change the world. The courthouse still displays a plaque in the main lobby commemorating the Meridian Industries case and the importance of civic courage. But Sarah's real legacy isn't hanging on any wall. It's in the dozens of young attorneys she has mentored, the hundreds of workers she has represented, and the countless times she has reminded people that in America, justice belongs to everyone, not just those with expensive suits and law degrees. That Tuesday morning, Sarah Martinez was just a single mother trying to make ends meet, invisible in a world that had taught her to stay quiet. By Tuesday evening, she was a whistleblower who had exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud. Within a year, she was a law student. Within a decade, she was one of the most respected attorneys in the state. But perhaps the most important transformation was the simplest one. Sarah Martinez learned that she had never been invisible at all. She had always been exactly where she was supposed to be, seeing exactly what she was supposed to see, waiting for the moment when her voice was needed most. Sometimes, the most profound changes begin not with a roar, but with a whisper from someone everyone thought wasn't worth listening to. The story of Sarah Martinez reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking up despite the fear, standing up despite the odds, and believing that your voice matters even when the world has taught you to stay silent. In a system that can sometimes seem designed to keep people in their assigned places, Sarah proved that intelligence, integrity, and courage can rewrite any script. And sometimes, when someone tells you to just clean the floor, the most revolutionary act is to lift your head, clear your throat, and remind everyone in the room that you have something important to say.